All right. All right. Hello, Mr. Reynolds. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you just fine.
All right. I am recording this here, and it is March 12th, 2021, and we are recording from West Carrollton High School. I am John Grosvenor in the Digital Arts Lab. I'm the Digital Arts instructor here at West Carrollton, and I'm speaking with Matt Reynolds, who is the art chair for the school district and the senior art instructor for studio arts here at West Carrollton High School. All right. Welcome, Matt.
Good to be here.
Can you briefly describe your background and experience in art education?
So I have been teaching here at West Carrollton for, I think this is my sixth or seventh year. But I came in as a studio art teacher who was also helping get the digital art program up and running. Before that, I taught middle school digital art and digital photography, and then a middle school ELL in Illinois and California before settling here. And since being here, we've grown the art program from offering 4 courses with 2 digital art and 2 studio art to offering 10 courses, where we have 5 programs in the digital art side, 4 currently in the studio art, and then a college level art history class as well.
Excellent. Thank you very kindly. All right, so this next question refers to drawing and how we learn to draw. So a lot of us, like we teach very similar in the way that we learn. You know, I can remember when I was a kid, my mom teaching me distinctly. I remember her teaching me how to draw a nose because I couldn't figure out how to draw a nose. Do you have any memories, or can you elaborate on any ways that you remember that you learned to draw? What methods do you remember from your personal art education, and do you still use any of those?
I personally remember learning how to do grid methods and how to transfer images and enlarge images. I touched base on that in middle school and high school when I was growing up. And then there's a lot of watercolor techniques that I learned from my professor when I was in college. He was an avid professional watercolorist that I still use and I still teach very much in the same way that he taught, of just like introducing and then like coaching while students explore the material. There are a lot of ceramic projects that I teach in very similar ways to how I learned, but over the years I've figured out and kind of crowdsourced some information and skills to improve on those.
Excellent.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. So some of the research I'm doing is going to be around, it's going to be, our research subject is going to be this particular school district that I'm using for my placement and the actual research students subjects. In this particular school district, what do you think is the biggest hindrance to student success, specifically in the arts? Or one of?
I think that our school district is interesting because it's where we are sitting and the kind of the geo-economical factors that our kids are coming from. It's historically a blue-collar area, but a handful of years ago, when the GM plant closed down, the #1 employer within the school district disappeared. So we have a lot of students who don't regularly see art as something that could be a realistic venture or a realistic pursuit or even a realistic hobby. And so one thing that we've been working on is just building up this idea of there are of things at all sorts of levels, and really like that it is a skill set and a interest that is worth pursuing.
Absolutely, and I would completely agree. That's probably the biggest in the school district is just general art exposure and to artists, museums, galleries, even like public art or street art or just any kind of like professional art careers. Our kids are just like kind of completely low to no exposure to such things. So
Right.
a lot of these things that we're showing that we do, like our Artist of the Week that we do, are very important. Like just a lot of times is the first time that they're seeing any kind of these careers.
Yeah.
So some of my research, I'm looking into like specifically some of the digital, not shortcuts, but some of the digital technology that we can employ to help kids more try to embrace artistic abilities and artistic careers or artistic, just like even as like, as practices. What technologies do you use in the digital education classes that you particularly taught? So when you started the digital program and helped launch it here, what kind of digital technologies did you put into practice?
So when I came in, I remember thinking that we were going to spend half a semester learning Photoshop and then half a semester learning Illustrator, and then kind of like wrap it all up with letting them kind of work between the two programs. And I quickly found that was just that would require much more like computer literacy than my students were bringing to the table. And so just getting them functioning at kind of that basic level of like making art on a computer using the digital processes and using things like layers to their advantage and masks, and like if you're repeating a shape, you don't have to physically like redraw that shape over and over and over again. You can, like copy and paste it endlessly. So just a lot of the shortcuts and even the thought processes, taking those from the studio over into the digital realm and being like, how we think when we're drawing, like when we're physically putting a pencil to paper and drawing, like let's think that way on this computer.
Excellent. Yeah. So you kind of answered one of my next questions. Having taught both traditional and digital arts, do you see some physical or some advantages of digital medias over traditional medias? And if so, is it something you promoted while you were in there? And you kind of touched on that where you said, these programs quickly, they can multiply, they can replicate things very quickly. They can do like mathematical kind of setups where they can distribute things evenly and on a grid or vertically, horizontally, or reflecting and mirroring everything that.
Right. Well, and even with like when we were doing the propaganda posters last year, and I was like, I'm going to do a day lesson on like hand lettering, so that way kids can like do good lettering on these posters. And you're like, oh my gosh, like that's why I do everything digitally. It's like there are a lot of ways where if student artist is proficient or even like aware of the abilities of both, like physically drawing something out versus like mapping something out digitally and then working with that. There's a lot of ways of making art production smoother and more efficient, like ultimately like more enjoyable.
Exactly. All right. What technologies are, having taught both traditional and digital art education, which do you find more difficult for students to feel successful with? And then overall, with that kind of thinking of, I know it's kind of a case-by-case situation, but overall, which would you think is harder for kids to get a grasp on?
I think it was harder for my students to be like happy with their work when it was when we were doing digital, because there's a learning curve with digital art that requires you to like know how to navigate around a computer. And so I felt like when I was teaching digital, there was a lot of like, okay, this is like how you right click and like saving files and a lot of the basics that like we don't have in the studio, because like while everyone might not know how to hold a pencil in order to like shade properly, like they know how to use a pencil.
Sure.
And so they're definitely bringing more like base level skills to the table in the studio world, where in the digital world, it's like, even though they're on their phones all the time, they're not functioning at a level that is like a deep enough understanding to produce.
Excellent. All right, and currently in your studio classes, do you utilize any kind of technology that you feel benefits your studio and traditional methods?
So, not, well, I guess I do. Moving into the whole like working virtual realm is been really nice, because it's gives me a clear platform to like provide resources. And so with the kids having a computer or a Chromebook available all the time, it's like I am pushing reference pictures, and there's absolutely no reason that you should just be like drawing from your imagination and or like drawing from your head if you're trying to make it look real. Like you'll get to a point that you can draw like a face without looking at a face, but like as high school level art students, like you guys aren't there. And so like look at a picture. Or if you're trying to draw a car and you're not like a huge car person, look at a picture of a car. And so that always strikes them as like this, like, oh, big moment. But it's really, I mean, fundamental. When we last year talked to Scott Listfield, who's like a professional working artist in LA, with like I just put together these like sloppy files on Photoshop with all my reference pictures, and he's like, and then I painted that. So
excellent. All right, and then the last couple questions here, kind of like your dream list here. So like if budget was not a factor, are there any technologies that you would want to employ in the art program as a whole at like any level?
if budget wasn't a factor, I would.
Would that be accurate that you may?
Oh, you're fine. Just doing an interview with John. Mr. Iser's here.
Hi, Mr. Iser.
Maybe. No. What, first year? No, I have like 17. Yes. I have 2 juniors, yeah. Okay, yeah. 8
I was a little freaked out.
As you're running around, it's like, oh my God. No, yeah, these are my only non-seniors.
Okay.
You're welcome. Mr. Iser came in with the schedules for scheduling day and was freaking out because he thought he lost an entire class.
We lost everybody. We lost everybody. All right, so coming back there, so if budget wasn't a factor, is there any technology you'd want to employ?
Budget wasn't a factor. I would love to have essentially like a projector facing at every wall, just to make tracing out smoother and faster. Like one of my art 4 students is doing some printmaking, and he had this really detailed drawing in his sketchbook, and then he was like, oh, I need to transfer this to like a linoleum block. And so we like hooked it up, and he sent it, and we resized it on the computer, and then he like taped his linoleum block up on the Promethean. It's like, you already drew this, so like I have absolutely no problems with you tracing this out for your
Mhm.
final thing. So I would ideally have like a really high quality projector on like every wall. I would have a couple computers set up to be like just in classroom like reference stations. Yep. Just
And-
a little more integration of like technology that is there, not necessarily with like a set job. We've got some really nice cameras coming, keeping some nice cameras, maybe a video camera or two, just to integrate some of that visual technology into our visual art class.
All right, and that is going to answer my last question. It was kind of like, how do you anticipate students reacting to those? And again, just like, at this level, the high school students, like I said, they a lot of times, just allowing them and saying that it's okay to trace some things, help
Yeah.
you to replicate some things at this stage, and it's part, it's a tool to help you learn at this stage. So absolutely.
Well, and I have a piece that I'm like tracing out a picture that I took of this like town in Europe that's super picturesque. But I didn't want to sit down and like do kind of like the math and the angles and everything the entire time. And so I was like, like this is my picture, and so my end goal is that. And so I was tracing it out in class, and one of my students was like, "Isn't that cheating?" And so I was like, "Well, like let's have a conversation of like what does cheating look like in art? Like the end goal is that like I am making a piece of art, not the end goal is like, wow, I can freehand draw this city exactly as it appears."
Excellent. And just kind of a follow-up question on that. Do you think, from your personal experience, do you think there are students and there's perceptions that digital art and some digital art techniques are perceived as cheating, as they would say?
Oh yeah. The idea of like taking their reference picture and like putting that as a layer underneath their work and like working on top of it is just like when the kids realize that like that's something that artists do, it just opens up their mind. They're like, oh my gosh, like that feels like cheating. It's like, but like, I mean, what's the end goal? Like,
Certainly.
is the end goal to say I drew this circle perfectly and it's like a perfect circle that I freed? Like, if that's your goal, then great. But if it's not, then like find something round and like trace it out. Like put a reference picture underneath so that way you can draw those features and like look at those features well. Like do a carbon or charcoal transfer on the back of an image and like trace that out onto your painting and then work off of that. Like these are things that artists have been doing for 600-700 years. As long as we can go back and see what artists have been doing, like these things have been a part of their practice. So
Absolutely.
just educating and knowing that like things that are okay, like it is okay to make your life easier. Yeah.
All right. Well, that concludes my interview questions. I thank you very much for your time, Mr. Reynolds.
You're welcome.
I will see you at lunch. Have a super duper day.
All right.
And I'm
Take care.
all right.